Hey guys, it's Chris. From the infamous 1962 escape from Alcatraz to one of the most horrific and unknown serial killers in history and his escape from prison, here are 10 of the wildest and craziest unsolved prison escapes. Number 10. Escape from the Rock. In June of 1962, 3 inmates escaped federal prison on Alcatraz Island and vanished into the San Francisco Bay. To this day, these 3 escapists have still never been seen. So far, they're the only people to ever successfully escape Alcatraz. But why was Alcatraz so inescapable? It was built as a defensive fortification for the Navy in the 1850s. Alcatraz housed military prisoners from the 1860s to the early 1930s. And when the United States Army finally transferred control of the island over to the Department of Justice in 1934, it was decided it would be a good place to open a maximum security prison. Alcatraz was to be used for the most hardened criminals in the prison system. It was the government's way of taking a hard stance against the crime ravaging the country. Even Al Capone was imprisoned in Alcatraz. As for those who escaped, it was Frank Morse, a man with a history of breaking out of prisons. Then there was John and Clarence Anglin, who were serving time for a bank robbery. And lastly, Alan West also participated in the escape, though he was left behind by the other 3 men. The escape was quite complex. They spent months digging through air vents with spoons and shaping fake heads out of paper and soap and human hair. In the end, they were listed as missing and presumed drowned because nobody ever believed they could have made it across the San Francisco Bay to land, even though they had crafted makeshift rafts from raincoats stolen or donated to them by fellow inmates. To date, no bodies have ever been found. 50 years later, in 2013, authorities received a mysterious letter. It was reportedly from John Anglin. As reported by the Vintage News, the letter starts with, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June of 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morse." The writer goes on to say, "I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." He says he will give himself up in exchange for medical treatment and 1 year in prison. The FBI did some tests that came out inconclusive and dropped the case. If it really was from John Anglin, he would be 91 years old today. Number 9. Escape from Camp Waterloo. Jerry Bergevin would have been over 80 years old today if still alive. He escaped from a Michigan prison camp in April of 1969 while doing time for burglary. And after 44 years on the run, nobody has any idea whether this guy is alive or dead. But finally, the Michigan Department of Corrections called the search off and granted Jerry an administrative discharge because of his age and how long the world has gone without hearing from him. If he is indeed still alive, he's just been given a pardon, but it probably doesn't mean much to an old geezer. According to Jerry's granddaughter, who spent years trying to piece together her family's turbulent past, Jerry probably died years ago. She believes he's long gone and doesn't hold out much hope for his return. As for how Jerry escaped Camp Waterloo in the first place, shortly after being imprisoned, he began sending letters begging to be transferred out of the state prison to Camp Waterloo to attend a dental technician training program. Prison officials were concerned because Jerry had behaved poorly in prison, but then in 1969 they relented and allowed for the transfer. The new prison was hardly a prison at all. There was just a measly fence with barbed wire keeping the prisoners inside. Jerry vanished from this place before he even started the dental class, and he's not been seen since. Number 8. Escape to Cuba. Joanne Chesimard is a notorious cop killer and was actually the first woman to ever be placed on the FBI's most wanted list. She was convicted of first-degree murder back in 1973 after shooting state trooper Werner Forrester on the New Jersey Turnpike. She was a member of the Black Liberation Army and considered to be an extreme radical. She was sentenced to life in prison but ended up escaping from the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in 1979. She's now been on the run for 4 decades. The last she was seen, Joanne was in Cuba in 1984, where she'd been given political asylum despite being a murderer. It's believed that Joanne has lived in Cuba ever since, enjoying a life of fun and sun, not being behind bars where she evidently should be. And now it's time to learn how she escaped, and it's perhaps the most dramatic prison escape that you're going to hear about today. It happened on November 2nd, 1979, when 3 members of the Black Liberation Army visited Joanne in prison, drew their .45 caliber pistols, then took 2 correctional officers as hostages and waved around a stick of dynamite. They managed to steal a van and escape without injuring anyone, leaving the officers in the parking lot. Joanne flew immediately to the Bahamas and was never seen on American soil again. But unfortunately for her helpers, they were mostly charged with assisting in her escape. The FBI is offering $1 million for any tips that could lead to Joanne Chesimard's arrest. Number 7. Escape the Tower of London. The Tower of London was once a terrifying place where prisoners would be kept in filthy dungeons full of rats, imprisoned for years, and sometimes sent to meet the executioner's axe. The Tower of London is about 900 years old and is an imposing fortress that still stands in the middle of central London today. It used to house the crown jewels and has held hundreds of famous prisoners throughout the years. But it was in 1716, the Countess Winifred Maxwell, the wife of the 5th Earl of Nithsdale of Truckare House, helped her husband to escape on the eve of his execution. He had originally been imprisoned after participating in the 1715 Battle of Preston. He'd also had all of his titles and lands forfeited. To try and get her husband out of prison, Winifred first lobbied in London for his release. She even met with King George I in person and tried to plead her husband's case. Her diplomacy failed and she had to resort to sneakier methods. The day before William was to be executed, she went to his cell wearing an extra petticoat and equipped with all the furnishings of an 18th century lady. While she visited her husband, she had many of her friends coming and going to make it look as though a procession of grievers were saying their goodbyes. It was during this procession that William escaped, dressed as a woman. Immediately after escaping the Tower of London, William and his wife fled to France. They lived long and healthy lives, and Winifred died 5 years after her husband in Rome in 1749. What do you think of everything that Countess did for her husband? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. Flee to Portugal. George Wright was convicted of murder in 1962 and was accused of participating in an armed robbery in which a dedicated World War II veteran and gas station owner was killed in cold blood. George spent several years in state prison until he escaped in 1970, and then hijacked a flight from Detroit to Miami dressed as a priest. The hijackers demanded the airplane be flown to Algeria, and it was during the trip to Algeria that George pulled the gun he had stashed in his hollowed-out Bible and put it against the flight attendant's head. He demanded money, or he would begin throwing dead bodies out of the door of the airplane every single minute. Well, everything actually worked out for George. He commandeered the Delta Airlines DC-8, and he got away with a hefty ransom, and then vanished into thin air. George eventually settled in Portugal, where he lived in peace for 15 years before the United States figured out he was in a small village 25 miles from Lisbon. He was tracked down by a task force. But much to the disappointment of the US government, Portugal denied their request to have him extradited. According to the Portuguese, the case is over and the US has no business with George. A spokesman for the Justice Department said they were disappointed with the outcome of the case. But on the flip side, George Wright said he was very happy with the outcome of the case. He also said he's at peace with himself and the law. He's even thinking about writing a book or making a movie about his life. Number 5. Frederick Morse. Frederick Morse is one of the weirdest serial killers in American history. He was an Austrian national who moved to New York City and killed 8 elderly patients using poison while employed at a nursing home. Frederick had used arsenic and chloroform to kill the elderly residents, though during the same time as the murders, 17 residents had died at the home, suggesting he may have had a hand in those deaths too. When questioned by the police, Frederick admitted to the murders and was oddly cooperative. He claimed he was simply putting them out of their misery, since many were old and had difficulties functioning. He was then diagnosed as being a megalomaniac, and he was ultimately committed to an insane asylum. But Frederick only spent a small amount of time at the Hudson River State Hospital. While his deportation to Austria was pending, he escaped the institution in May of 1916. Frederick resurfaced in 1917 and was found living under an alias, but then he disappeared again. In 1923, a skeletonized corpse was discovered and identified as the potential remains of Frederick Morse, though he was only identified because of the specific shoes he was wearing, which were known to be his favorite. Either Frederick died, or he very cleverly faked his own death. Number 4. 60 years on the run. John Patrick Hannon was only 22 years old when he fled the Verne prison, located on the Isle of Portland in the southern coast of England. This escape happened on December 22, 1955. Today, John Patrick would be in his 80s, assuming, of course, he's still alive. Nobody actually knows if John Patrick survived following his prison escape, But he probably did, seeing as he was never registered as dead. According to the Huffington Post, he was by default the world's most successful prison fugitive since he's technically been on the run for over 60 years. It all started because John Patrick was sentenced to spend 21 months in jail for stealing a car and assaulting 2 police officers. Instead of doing the time, he broke out of the facility after only 30 days. He used the classic escape method of tying his bed sheets together and climbing over the wall. John then robbed a gas station, stole clothes, beer, and cigarettes, and then fled the island. Another young man who escaped with him was discovered 16 hours after the incident and sent straight back to prison. But John Patrick made it all the way out and is believed to have returned to his home in Ireland. To this day, John is still a wanted man, though the local police departments gave up actively searching for him in 1998. Number 3. Twice escaped. Glenn Godwin escaped prison not once, but twice. He escaped first after being convicted of robbery and murder back in 1981 and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. He was brought to California's Folsom Prison in 1987 after first trying to escape from a correctional facility in Tracy. He tried to escape again in Folsom and actually got away with it. He convinced another inmate to give him a job in an area of the prison that had lower security. He then managed to escape through a storm drain. On the other side of the drain, he rafted across the American River to his awaiting getaway car. According to a prison employee involved in the investigation, after finding the tunnel where Godwin escaped from, there was a white smiley face painted on the ground as if Godwin were mocking them. But Godwin turned up at a prison in Mexico in 1991 after being arrested and convicted on charges of cocaine trafficking. He was about to be extradited back to the United States of America when he escaped prison for a second time. FBI Special Agent Dan Rodriguez said in 2014 that Godwin probably committed a murder while inside the prison in exchange for help escaping. Since then, Godwin has remained at large and is still wanted by the authorities. Number 2. Glenn Chambers. Glenn Chambers beat a woman to death in 1975 and was convicted by a jury of first-degree murder. The jury sentenced him to death. However, the Florida Supreme Court decided against the death sentence and instead ordered that he spend the rest of his life in jail. It would be 25 years after being incarcerated that Glenn Chambers finally escaped the Polk Correctional Institution on February 21st of 1990, and to this day, Glenn is still a wanted man. But how did he escape 25 years into his prison sentence? Glenn was building furniture in his prison work program and somehow managed to hide inside the furniture he was building and have himself shipped to Daytona Beach. This is arguably the cleverest prison escape we've heard of today. It was 30 years ago that Glenn escaped, and he's still considered to be at large. If he's alive, he would be about 70 years old. Number 1. Helicopter escape. Benjamin Haddam Barbeau has been sentenced to 16 years in prison for his role in a daring yet failed helicopter escape from a detention center in Quebec back in 2013. As you probably already know, prison breaks don't really happen all that often anymore. With technology, security cameras, and everything else we have at our disposal today, there isn't a lot an inmate can do to escape. And yet one happened in Canada in 2013, when Benjamin and another inmate named Danny were rescued by 2 of their accomplices who hijacked a helicopter and forced the pilot to fly over the jail where the 2 men could climb aboard. The entire prison break was even captured on surveillance footage. But unfortunately for these guys, they didn't make it very far. According to CBC News, the police recaptured both inmates just hours after their escape and have since locked them in the highest security section of the building. Benjamin has been forced to stay inside his cell for 20 hours a day and to have no physical contact with any other inmates, which honestly sounds worse than a death sentence. In fact, Benjamin's isolation has been called a violation of his human dignity, and he managed to get himself a reduced sentence. He now has 9 years left of his prison sentence, though of course he is still locked up for a reason, so don't have too much sympathy for this guy. He was convicted of 2 murders along with 2 separate attempted murders. Thanks for watching. Would you dare to attempt a prison escape if you ever got locked up? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button for the latest from the channel. We'll see you next time.